Okay, this is going to be a really quick review of three categories of disorders that are in the DSM: anxiety, mood depression, and somatic or somatoform disorders. And so I'm going to go really quickly through. If you need to reference your DSM packets, do that. They're going to have a more thorough list of symptoms, but I'm just going to briefly define each of the disorders you need to know. So we're going to start with anxiety disorders. You need to know the different anxiety disorders. We're going to start with generalized anxiety disorder. And this is where someone has persistent, long-lasting feelings of worry, just general anxiety and stress, and apprehension for long periods of time. Panic disorder is characterized by having multiple episodes of panic attacks. So these are the episodes of intense dread and terror that overcome someone for just a few minutes. They're going to have a feeling of choking or maybe chest pain, and they need to have multiple episodes of those panic attacks for it to be panic disorder. Phobias are where someone has a fear of an object. We're going to call that a specific phobia. If it's an animal, whether it's usually animals, things, objects, that would be considered a specific phobia. A social phobia is now called social anxiety disorder. This is where someone has a fear of a social situation, a public situation, whether that's public speaking or just being in front of people, that sort of thing. That would be a social anxiety disorder. Agoraphobia is unique. It's a specific kind of social anxiety disorder, but this is where someone has a really large fear of being outside in public somewhere in a public situation, and that fear is overcoming them with this like feeling that they're not going to be able to escape that situation, and then they're fearful of having that panic and that panic attack in that situation that they cannot escape in that social situation, and so then they don't want to leave their house. Okay, we also have post-traumatic stress disorder, and this is something that someone would experience after incredible trauma. So they're going to have an experience that's incredibly stressful, and so then because of that experience, they continue to relive that experience later in life through just everyday stimulus that trigger their stress and their fear, and they bring back those memories that cause them to go back and relive that, whether it's through nightmares at night or even in the daytime. OCD is a pairing of two things: obsessions and compulsions. An obsession is a thought. It's usually really intrusive. It's coming in, it's unwanted, it's persistent, and it's causing them to do this behavior or this action. The unwanted thought might be something like death and dying, contracting an illness, and then the behavior might be like hand washing a certain number of times or checking in a certain way. BDD is body dysmorphic disorder, and body dysmorphic disorder is an anxiety around a body part. So that might be a nose, an arm, skin, something like that, and the anxiety is revolving around that body part. Trichotillomania is the anxious hair pulling. Dermatillomania is the anxious skin scratching. Okay, we are going to move on to mood and depressive disorders. For mood and depressive disorders, you need to know that major depression is having a period of sadness or lack of interest or pleasure in everyday activities that last longer than 2 weeks. Persistent depressive disorder is also called dysrhythmic depression or dysrhythmia, and this is where someone has a very long, enduring depression that is lasting over 2 years. So it's very, very, very long. Seasonal affective disorder, this is where someone has a reoccurring period of sadness, but it's tied to the season. So it's typically wintertime where someone is experiencing the sadness, and it's linked to the weather and the amount of sunlight. Next is bipolar disorder. There is type 1 and type 2, but you only just need to know bipolar disorder. This is where the person is switching from a feeling of low to a feeling of excitability. And the excitability doesn't have to be positive. It could be an irritable high. So they're feeling very low, depressed, and then they move into this high period, and that is called mania. Mania looks like excitability, irritability, They might be incredibly productive. They might have insomnia and not be able to sleep. They might feel incredibly creative, or they might do really out of character things that are very energetic. They could be really impulsive. They could go on spending sprees or abuse drugs and alcohol in their manic state. All right, now we've got somatic symptom disorders. These are disorders that are revolving around the body in some way. Somatic means body, and so there's some psychological issues that are occurring, and then it's manifesting in itself through the body somehow. So first, we've got illness anxiety. Illness anxiety, you might know as someone being called a hypochondriac or hypochondriasis. And this is where someone is overly fixated on this idea that they're going to develop an illness, and that it's, whether it's something very severe from cancer or, stomach ailments or whatever. They need to have multiple occurrences, though, not just one situation. There needs to be multiple situations where they're feeling that they're going to contract an illness. Conversion disorder is where someone has experienced some trauma, and that trauma is creating some psychological pain. And because they have that psychological pain, their mind converts it into a physical pain. And so when they go to the doctor will notice they've got some biological, physical issue going on, whether that's paralysis, blindness, hearing loss, vision loss, all kinds of different things that are going on, tremors. But the doctor can't link it to something as a biological cause. So losing sight, but yet they still should have vision. Their eyes and their brains still operate as though they should be seeing, but they're not seeing. And so what's happening is that a psychological pain has converted into a physical pain. Next, we have fictitious disorders. Fictitious disorders are disorders that have been fabricated, disorders that there is some kind of bodily illness, but the person has created the bodily illness. And the reason why they've created or fabricated this is because they're either, one, experiencing Munchausen's and they're trying to get some kind of sympathy from others, or they're trying to get attention, like emotional support from other people. Or the second reason might be malingering. They're escaping some kind of financial debt, or they're trying to get some financial reward or something like that. There's this physical punishment reward tied to the fabrication. By proxy can be with Munchausen's or malingering. It just means that the person isn't creating it in themselves. By proxy means they're creating it in someone else. And so they could have Munchausen's, just simply Munchausen syndrome, meaning they're creating it in themselves. They're fabricating an illness in themselves to get sympathy. Or it could be Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which means they're fabricating and creating this illness in a child or in another person to get sympathy for their care of that child or person. Okay, I'm going to stop this here, and then if you want to watch the second segment will go over the final 3 categories of disorders.